Oh, let me talk about my coming back here.
In an era where African Americans faced immense barriers, Josephine Baker defied the odds, not just with her talent, but by transforming her success into a weapon for change. Decades of discrimination and hatred towards African Americans gave rise to the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural and social movement that emerged from the racial disparity and poverty of the 1920s. Despite this era of cultural growth, the struggle for Black Americans' rights remained a prominent issue, specifically limiting their work opportunities. Josephine Baker, a trailblazing African American entertainer, utilized her talents to free herself from these conditions, rising to global fame. Recognizing the responsibility that came with her platform, Baker fought for African American rights, supported the French resistance during World War II, and became a civil rights activist. Her life was a blueprint for how individuals can fulfill ethical and social responsibilities to fight for equal rights and pave the way for future generations in art and activism. Growing up in an impoverished family in St. Louis, Josephine Baker began working at a young age and eventually discovered performing as a path to escape poverty. At just 15 years old, she joined a dance troupe called the Dixie Steppers and moved to New York as the Harlem Renaissance was blossoming. She quickly rose to fame and started her journey as a world-renowned performer. However, despite the cultural boom the Renaissance brought, opportunities for Black people remained limited and discrimination was still prominent. Baker grew frustrated with the mistreatment she and others around her faced and decided to take her career across the globe to Paris. In an interview with Henry Louis Gates in 1973, Baker reflected on her reasoning for moving to Paris, saying, "One day I realized I was living in a country where I was afraid to be Black. It was only a country for white people, not Black, so I left. I'd been suffocating in the United States. A lot of us left, not because we wanted to leave, but because we couldn't stand it anymore. I felt liberated in Paris." In Europe, Baker's distinct dancing style and unique costumes caused her fame to skyrocket, establishing her as a household name. Her performances incorporated African themes and fashion, as well as her own unique flamboyant style. She was known for both dancing and singing, and even played in several successful European motion pictures. She was the first African American woman to ever star in a major motion picture, causing her to achieve international stardom, challenging the racial prejudices dominating her home country of the United States. Audiences were captivated by Baker, with André Levinson, a prominent French critic, describing Baker's dancing as embodying wild splendor and magnificent animality, capturing the frenzy of African eros. In 1926, she donned her famous banana skirt for a performance at Folies Bergère's La Folie du Jour, a performance that mocked the white perceptions of Black culture. Her costume, made of nothing more than 16 rubber bananas, pearls, and jewels, exaggerated common African stereotypes such as being hypersexual and barbaric, forcing audiences to confront their own biases towards Black identity. Her performances embodied a responsibility to change the stereotypes that limited Black people's rights and representation in media and culture. Despite her European fame, Baker still faced unfair criticism in America. Her 1936 New York performance of the Banana Dance became infamous, and despite her status as a cultural icon, she was subject to discrimination and Jim Crow laws upon any returning to the United States. Whenever Baker would return home to America, she had to enter show halls from the service entrance, and often she would arrive at hotels to find her reservation was canceled, as stated by writer Laurent Kupferman. Because of this poor treatment from many establishments in America, Baker made the decision to return to Paris for good, but made it her responsibility to confront racial discrimination more actively moving forward. The Nazi invasion on Poland in 1939 was the start of what would become the deadliest war in history, World War II. France was captured by the Nazis in 1940, but within weeks of this, the French began to take action against them. The French resistance gathered German intelligence, spread anti-Nazi propaganda, and sabotaged German operations. Jacques Abti, a French intelligence officer trying to gather strategic information about the war, was the one who initially hired Baker as a spy. Abti hoped that Baker could use her stardom to seduce secrets out of diplomats at Axis embassy parties without looking suspicious. She carried secret photographs underneath her dress, had sheet music with information about German troop movements in invisible ink, and wrote notes on things she overheard and safety pinned them to her bra. She was confident that no one would suspect anything, saying, "My notes would have been highly compromising had they been discovered, but who would dare search Josephine Baker to the skin?" Baker journeyed to Morocco in 1941 to establish a liaison and transmission center in Casablanca for the French resistance. She used her connections to secure passports for thousands of Jews fleeing the Nazis. The same year, she was hospitalized with peritonitis, underwent multiple surgeries, and was bedridden for 18 months. Despite her illness, she continued espionage work by hosting diplomats and resistance members from her hospital bed. She returned to Paris after its liberation in 1944 and was celebrated as a patriotic heroine. By risking her life for France, Baker redefined the scope of responsibility. Her fight for protecting human rights expanded across the globe. Her actions revealed that the responsibility to uphold justice goes beyond national borders and personal safety. Many were confused on why Baker chose to put her life at risk and become a spy. In a 1974 interview with Ebony magazine, Baker said, "Of course I wanted to do all I could to aid France, my adopted country. But an overriding consideration, the thing that drove me as strongly as did patriotism, was my violent hatred of discrimination in any form." After experiencing firsthand how harsh the realities of discrimination can be through the Holocaust, Baker grew more passionate about demanding equal rights in the United States, the home she had previously felt so unwelcome in. She began to travel more and more to the United States to support the civil rights movement and advocate for those who had faced similar experiences to her own. Baker refused to perform for segregated audiences and stood against unequal treatment at any venue she came to perform at. In instances where she would experience discrimination, she would be quick to file reports to the NYPD and spread word about racist treatment, once even organizing a protest against the Stork Club, a nightclub she had performed at that was spreading dangerous rumors, including that Baker and other black artists were fascist and even anti-black. Baker would oftentimes include her point of view on being a black woman and facing racism in much of her work. Her song, Si j'étais blanche, translating to If I Were White, expresses her sentiments about how white people are afforded privileges that she has never been granted and wishing she were white herself while still celebrating being black. In 1963, Baker spoke in front of her biggest audience ever at the March on Washington, a civil rights march through the country's capital demanding change on the treatment of African Americans. Baker prepared a nearly 3-minute-long speech in which she spoke about how important it was for both black and white people to unite together rather than be separated by prejudice and violence, stating, "I want you to know also how proud I am to be here today. And after so many long years of struggle fighting here and elsewhere for your rights, our rights, the rights of humanity, the rights of man, I'm glad that you have accepted me to come. I didn't ask you, I didn't have to, I just came because it was my duty. And I'm going to say again, you are on the eve of complete victory." Baker paved the way for future generations of black artists to succeed on their own terms. Her career demonstrated that art can be used for many purposes, such as challenging stereotypes, a tool for advocacy, as well as self-expression. She set a precedent for modern artists and inspired them to use their platforms for social change. Baker's contributions have received recognition across the world. In 2021, she became the first black woman to be inducted into the Pantheon in Paris, France's highest honor, with French President Emmanuel Macron remarking during the ceremony that Baker broke down barriers. Josephine Baker was a trailblazer for equal rights and entertainment, impacting not only the United States, but France. She understood that it was her responsibility to advocate for equality in the entertainment industry and beyond. From speaking at the March on Washington to refusing unequal treatment from white-owned establishments, Baker paved the way for so many black and female entertainers to come after her.